All right, Krystal, what's on your radar?
Well, as you know, Democrats failed to take control of the Senate on election night and face quite long odds to win both of the Georgia runoffs, which are set to occur in January. Now, most mainstream commenters have remarked on what a blow this is to Biden and to the Democrats. As one example, centrist Washington Post columnist Ruth Marcus lamented Biden's mission impossible in a column that was published the day after the election. In an impressive feat of low expectation setting, Marcus details all of the obstacles poor Joe will face, concluding that, quote, winning was hard enough, governing effectively in this environment may be mission impossible. Now, it is true, of course, that the Biden admin, thanks to the failures of the Democratic establishment and their own uninspiring campaign, have some tough headwinds. But it's also true that the one thing Democrats love most are excuses for their own impotence. We'd love to be doing amazing things for you, but you know, those mean old Republicans, they just keep getting in the way. Barack Obama is still out there with the new book doing the woe is me song and dance when he had a majority in the House and a super majority in the Senate. Let that one sink in. In fact, there is plenty that Joe Biden could do if he so chooses. The executive branch has quite a bit of unilateral power, and those powers have been consistently expanded, for better or worse, during the Bush, Obama, and now Trump administrations. The possibility for unilateral Biden action is underscored by the agency review teams that were just announced by the Biden-Harris transition. These are the people meant to study the current workings of government agencies and prepare for the transition of power. That list includes, by the way, some encouraging names with a real record of challenging corporate power and a lot of more standard issue corporate Democrat hacks. So, if we presume a completely intransigent Senate and inability to pass anything through Congress, what are some significant actions that a Biden administration could take on their own? The journalists at the American Prospect have done a lot of work thinking through exactly this question, and I highly recommend you read through all of what they've put together on the topic. They've even identified a full 277 executive actions that come directly out of the Biden-Bernie task forces alone. Again, that's a list of 277 items that the Biden team has ostensibly agreed to and which require zero action from Congress. So far, I haven't heard the Biden team themselves float anything more bold than simply rolling back the Trump-era executive actions. It's that good old back to 2012 feeling. The Washington Post had a good piece on this planned reset. It seems nearly certain that the incoming Biden administration will undo Trump's actions on everything from immigration, including the Muslim ban, to rejoining the Paris Climate Accords, to re-entering the World Health Organization. They're also likely to seek to re-enter the Iranian nuclear deal, which could be one of their more consequential acts if they're able to pull it off. But just as Trump was aggressive in using executive action in ways that the mainstream media was usually too busy Russiagating to tell you about, if he so chose, Biden could go way beyond just a Make America 2012 Again agenda. One bold item proposed by Chuck Schumer, who's clearly terrified of a primary challenge, by the way, is to forgive all or the bulk of student loan debt. He and Elizabeth Warren have introduced a resolution calling for the elimination of up to $50,000 in student loan debt. This debt burden is a significant part of the story of how millennials and Gen Z are being absolutely crushed. 45 million borrowers owe something like $1.6 trillion in student loan debt. For context, that is more than car debt, and it is more than credit card debt, and 1/4 of those borrowers are currently behind on their payments. I can only imagine what the pandemic economy has done to those numbers. Now, Biden called for $10,000 in student loan debt forgiveness on the trail. So not only would this be an incredibly significant move, it really has strong precedent as well. In an admirable move, the Trump administration forgave all student loan debt for totally and permanently disabled veterans. So the Biden administration here would be on firm ground. That's really just the beginning, though. They could use executive action to launch postal banking, providing a financial lifeline for the USPS, and more importantly, helping provide more equitable access to banking services for the poor. Somewhere around 1 in 5 Americans has no bank or is underbanked, meaning that they're forced in the rapacious predatory world of payday lenders. They could also reschedule marijuana, which would in effect decriminalize the drug and at least lower the temperature somewhat on the war on drugs. They could aggressively enforce antitrust in an effort to reset the incredibly narrow and limiting way that antitrust has been interpreted, although that one piece may set up a showdown with the conservative Supreme Court. They could take bold action to lower drug prices. They could provide union rights to Medicaid-paid home health care workers. They could aggressively prosecute companies that engage in union busting, wage theft, and other labor abuses like misclassifying workers, and refuse to do federal business with labor law violators. Between executive orders, regulatory changes, and enforcement, Biden and his team may not be able to transform America in the way that is ultimately required, but they can do quite a bit more than just return to normal. Think of it this way. Just imagine what a competent and ideological Trump might have accomplished with executive authority and what he was able to accomplish even with all of their unbelievable bumbling. Democrats truly feared that Trump would remake the country all on his own. But somehow, when they get in a position of power, they want you to believe that their hands are tied and there's absolutely nothing they can do. Don't believe their narrative. Senate or no, Joe Biden ran as Scranton Joe. He donned the language of a working class candidate, and he has a responsibility to deliver for working class Americans, and he has more than enough tools to actually do something other than make excuses. And what I wanted to talk about here, Zucker, is twofold. First of all, I already see the low expectation setting. I already see the excuse making of like, oh, too bad, Republican Senate can't get anything done. That lets him completely off the hook, and I will not stand for that. There is a lot that if he wants to, he can absolutely do. And the second piece here is, look, I think we have to be able to hold his feet to the fire over specific actions that could actually be taken and start thinking big about what those possibilities are.
I think you're right. And, I think this is part of the issue, which is that we basically learned, even under Obama, that with the supermajority, nothing's happening. I mean, and that's a kind of an amazing development, right? Because it was one of those mysterious things that was promised to people over and over again. They're like, if you just get us that supermajority, we can pass everything on the planet. Didn't happen. And that's kind of an amazing political development. And then the normalization of executive orders and so much more. Even in executive orders, what I learned through Trump is there's still an interagency bureaucratic process. You need an immense amount of political will in order to get a meaningful executive order done. You need the people in the agencies to get on board and the lawyers, and everything has to be published properly. I think Biden will probably do a lot better job of that. But
it couldn't
again,
do much of a worse job.
It's still a thing of discrete choices. Is when you have a White House counsel's office with 12 lawyers. Let's say they can work on like a couple of EOs at the same time. Which ones do they pick?
Right.
That's the eternal question. And that's where political messaging and so much more comes into play. I saw this happen with Trump all the time. Whatever the culture war thing always ended up happening. My Buy American order that I've been wanting for like a year, I don't see that anywhere.
Yeah.
That's kind of an issue, right? And it's because big business interests in the administration held it up. And I have such a long list.
If the Biden admin was smart, and I don't expect them to be, but if they were, they should take literally that order,
and just
sign
pass
it day one,
And it's funny, so the Biden people put out their list of their transition team members yesterday. And I mean, look, I went through it, and there's some good people on there. There's some good people on trade. There's some good people on China. His lead NSC person has actually been calling out Trump for being too weak on China, where I'm like, wow, that's some political, going. But I'm like, this is interesting, just to see how the Overton window. Do I have any faith that that's really going to manifest itself? I have no idea.
It depends on who's controlling, because it was a real mixed bag. It was very, we'll call it ideologically balanced between people who are good and people who are not good.
Yeah. Look, there were like Lyft executives and Uber people and Airbnb people, and then there were like people who you've seen on this show, right? So you're like, oh.
There are people who are literally like thought leaders in screwing over gig workers, and then people who are on the opposite side of that spectrum. So where does that leave us? I don't know. The fact that there was anyone included who I was like, oh, okay, that's good, was encouraging to me. The other piece of this, though, is I still see, think about this. You had 8 years of the Obama administration. Why was Joe Biden brought onto that ticket? The idea was, he's got these great relationships with Mitch McConnell and all these members of the Senate.
Yes.
He's going to be the deal maker. And over 8 years, they never learned that the GOP Senate had zero interest in working with them and we're going to obstruct at every single turn. And yet I still see centrists making this case of like, but Joe Biden and Mitch McConnell, they have a great relationship, so they're going to be able to work together and all this stuff. You are insane if you think that that's going to happen. Like, that is a complete and utter fantasy. So forget about it. Just forget about it. The smoothest, the most likely path to any significant change whatsoever, assuming a GOP Senate, which this cycle is highly likely, is going to be through using executive powers and doing what you can through interpreting of regulations, through legal action, through the Department of Justice, and through executive orders. That is the path that everyone should be focused on, because this idea that you're going to come to the table with Mitch McConnell is ridiculous. They couldn't even get Mitch McConnell to agree on cutting Social Security through a grand bargain last time around, which I'm glad that didn't work out. But those are also, that's the contours of the type of deals that you would be working on with a GOP Senate.
One of the key things to always remember is that the areas that they agree on and that are bipartisan are the worst ones, right? So if you want Venezuela,
great.
They'll work together, I'm sure. I mean, what I'm terrified of is like, Mitch and Joe team up to redo TPP. Or Mitch and Joe team up to like roll back NAFTA to what it was in 1994. Or Mitch and Joe team up in order to pass, Amnesty 2.0 from 2013. I could see it happen. Lindsey Graham's already out there saying Simpson Bowles on cutting the debt. Lindsey's out there, he's the Senate Budget Committee chairman, being like, I want to work with Joe to reduce the debt. This is all very within the realm of possibility. That's what bipartisanship actually looks like. That's the terrifying one, and I don't want to see any of it happen.
Indeed. Yeah. All right, Sagar, looking forward to your radar. That's next.